Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Shift Book Club. I'm Sam Baker, as you know, and I couldn't be more delighted to welcome Maggie O'Farrell, author of our July Book Club pick, Land. And here is my much loved, much scrawled on proof. Um, and Maggie is here not so much by popular demand as popular insurrection. So when Land was announced last year, I had a pile in the chat. People going, "Oh, can we get Maggie? Can we get Maggie?" And I was like, probably not, but I'll try. And here you are. So thank you so much.
Yes.
Um, just a bit more blurb. As a long-time fan of Maggie's books, I can't tell you how happy I am to see her incredible stories reaching a huge new audience. Thanks in large part to Hamnet, which back in 2020, sorry, I just let a couple more in. Back in 2020, won Waterstone's Book of the Year and the Women's Prize. And then Jessie Buckley and Paul Mescal happened, and the rest is history. But here's a little bit of gossip for you. The production team behind Hamnet have also bought the rights to Land, so you can start getting excited about that now. Yeah, it is the biggest group ever, and they're still coming, but that's not really a surprise at all. In the wake of all that, it'd be easy to forget that Land is Maggie's 10th novel. Her fifth, The Hand That First Held Mine, won the Costa Award in 2010. And her last novel, The Marriage Portrait, was shortlisted for the Women's Prize. And that's not to mention the memoir, the children's books, the 43 languages, the 4 million copies. But Maggie is here to talk to us about The Wonderful Land, which shot straight into the New York Times bestseller list and straight to number one in the Sunday Times bestseller list. And I know from all of you who have been talking in the chat that everyone who's finished reading it absolutely adored. Excuse me. Oh yeah, Esme Lennox. I haven't forgotten Esme Lennox. Like, you argue amongst yourself over which is best. Um, if anyone hasn't finished or hasn't read it at all, pop a note in the chat. I won't shame you, just to make sure that we don't spoiler or do anything to spoil your reader experience. Um, Maggie, thank you so much for being here. You must be crawling towards your holiday, are you?
I am actually almost crying. Well, I want to say thank you so much for having me, and also thank you for changing the time. I feel like I'm responsible for shifting the shift, so it's really
Yes.
nice to meet you all. And I'm really sorry about the. It was just me being disorganised, and then I had something I couldn't move. So thank you all very much for rearranging and shifting.
Oh, not at all. Um, so where should we start? I mean, I guess Land is your most intimate and personal book. So let's start with the story behind Land, if that's all
Right.
right.
So yeah, not at all. So Land is a book that I've been thinking about writing for a really long time, but I couldn't for years actually find a way into it. I couldn't find a way to make it fiction, um, just or to kind of bring it to life because it is loosely based on a family story on my great great grandfather who we were told as children. I think all families have a kind of myth, or many myths actually. And one of the ones in mine was that we had an antecedent who'd worked on. I mean, as a child, I heard the story as the the first ever map of Ireland, which of course
Yeah,
is
very old.
total nonsense. But yeah, but that was that was the story that I kind of metabolized and took to heart. And also, I kind of envisaged him when I was a child. So I was born in Ireland, but as you can probably tell straight away that I didn't grow up there. But we did used to go back a lot during the summer. And so I would look out of the window of our car and I would kind of visualize this relative. And I think I based him visually on sort of Sunday night costume dramas because he
Yeah.
was kind
Oh God.
of the sort of 70s and 80s. So he was wearing a kind of frock coat and there was definitely some kind of cravat, maybe a top hat. And in my mind, he was always holding my school issue wooden 30 centimeter ruler because obviously that's how you measure a whole country. So, so he's always been kind of in my mind. And then when I got obviously a bit older and a bit more realistic about the world, I went to search for him in the Ordnance Survey archives in Dublin. So Dublin holds all the Ordnance Survey archives for Ireland. But he was really hard to find because when I got there, I discovered that if you were Irish and you worked for the Ordnance Survey, which was, of course, a British government organisation and mostly run by the British Army, if you were Irish, you weren't allowed to sign your own work. So I knew that somewhere in all this incredible cache of books and footnotes and field notes and draft measurements and all this kind of translation and delving into Irish folklore and place names. Well, I knew that in there was his work, but I couldn't identify it because it was also had to be signed by a British officer. But I did find his signature on kind of, it was on mostly on sort of record sort of memos that had gone around what they called the labourers, which meant the Irish workers, and I found his signature, and that was a really lightning bolt moment because it was partly because I had that kind of archival thrill knowing that I was touching a piece of paper that he had touched at one point to sign his name, but also it was the first piece of incontrovertible evidence that there was truth in the family myth, that he had worked not on the first ever map of Ireland, but he'd worked for the Ordnance Survey. But also the date of it really struck me because it was 1849, that signature, and that stopped me in my tracks because I knew that that was in the mid, sort of towards the end of the Great Famine, and it suddenly became clear to me why they were making revisions of the map to Ireland,
Mm.
why it was necessary, and I just thought, I always think that fiction. I think you're often told in fiction writing workshops that you should write what you know, but I always find that actually fiction comes for me from a place of something that you don't know or you don't understand. And I think the question or the thing that I didn't understand was what must that task have been like? What must it have been like to have lived through that terrible cataclysm and then be responsible for, or one of the people responsible for setting it down cartographically on the map. So that's a very long answer to your question, Sam. Sorry.
No, that's the longer the better. We're here for the long answers. We don't have to be disciplined in the way that we do have to on stage. So,
Okay,
had
cool.
you started looking for him before you decided to write the story?
Yes, because we do have some kind of stray, excuse me, evidence of him in our house, actually. So in the house where I grew up, there's a map on the wall which is hand drawn, and it's by the character who's called Liam in the book. So the mapmaker's son, who's my great grandfather, and he has drawn a map for, I think it's for his father, the mapmaker, and it's of an imaginary place. And I know you've seen it because I think I showed it to you, didn't I?
Yeah, you showed me
Um,
a picture on your
I showed
phone.
you a
Yeah.
picture of it, yeah. So that's been hanging in our hallway for as long as I can remember, and I must have walked past it 1,000 times when when I used to live in that house. And there was just one day quite recently where in the corner there are these tiny medallions, and you can't really see them with the naked eye. And there was just one day, about 5, 6 years ago, and I took a photo of it on my phone and then blew it up and looked at these tiny medallions, and I realised that in these medallions were, I mean, tiny portraits, tiny, tiny portraits. And a friend of mine who's an artist was looking at them recently, and she said they must have been painted with a brush with maybe one or two bristles on it because they're so small, and with a magnifying glass. And there's a portrait of his father, Tomas, and he's standing behind a British soldier in a red jacket, and the soldier's looking through a theodolite. And if I could share screens, which I don't know how to do, I could show you this as I'm describing it. And the father, Tomas, is standing behind him, and he's looking quite anxious. And it's such a kind of politically freighted portrait, and it says so much about who he was and the way he's standing I can recognize him from the one photograph we have of Tomas and Liam. It was just them sitting outside the cottage, and Liam is on Tomas's knee, and it's such a beautiful portrait. But I recognised him from that, and I was so shocked because I thought, this is the man I've been thinking about since I was a child and looking for years, and there he's been all that time, hiding in plain sight in this little tiny secret portrait of him.
So weird. He's just been watching you, waiting for you to catch up with him
Waiting for me to
almost.
pay attention properly. Yes, exactly, as often happens.
So was that the kind of moment you thought, okay, I want to kind of imagine this story that hasn't been told, or
I
when was
think that's
that
it. I mean,
kind of?
I was always interested in it, and I always wanted to know more. But partly because the act of I mean, there's so much fascinating about it. The act of mapping is so interesting, particularly in a place so where land is has such potent meaning and
Mm.
potent forces in Ireland. And mapping itself is such a fascinating discipline. It's part sort of artistry and it's part geography and geology and mathematics and algebra, and but it's also, linguistics and folklore and history, and it's such a kind of wide discipline. So that's always fascinating. And geography was always my second favorite subject at school.
You're so weird. Nobody likes geography. Like
I love geography.
nobody.
I love it.
Can't
And actually,
believe
weirdly,
it.
there are a lot of geographers in my family. And my cousin is a cartographer. I mean, obviously, cartography is very different these days, and it's all done by
Yeah,
drones,
machine.
satellite, and
Yeah.
machines. And she's very technical and can do it on a computer. But there's definitely something. There's something in our DNA as a family, I think, in the O'Farrells. Um,
You're
so yeah, so
into maps. Yeah.
geography was always my favorite, my second favorite subject, and the bit I really liked about my so I did Scottish Highers. I mean, and I did advanced Highers. In an advanced higher geography, you part of the exam was you were given a square mile of an ordnance survey map you'd never seen before, and you had to write about what you saw. So to me, it was always a bit like storytelling, and I really think storytelling and
Mm.
geography and map making there's a big overlap.
It makes, oh God, I've got so many questions like which way to go. Before I go onto like lands, I'm going to go back to your great great grandfather because you, after all that time searching for him in Dublin, you actually did find maps with his signature on, didn't you? A little bit closer to home.
Yeah, that's right. So when I was in Dublin, and there was evidence of him, and I could find some. So there were lots of different things they had to do when they were walking about the land, measuring it, and making these revisions on the map. But one of the things they had to fill in were they were called field books, and they were kind of oblong shaped jotters, and you wrote down all kinds of observations and place names, and they're fascinating things. And I found some of them in Ireland that I thought were his, possibly, but actually it's really hard to know. And they all at that time wrote in this very beautiful kind of copperplate handwriting, which is actually quite similar when you look at them all. So, but there was a mention in the archives that some of the personnel in the 1850s were sent to Scotland. So some of the personnel that worked in Ireland were sent to Scotland. And I just thought, because I live in Edinburgh, like Sam does, and I just thought, actually, you know what? I'll just go along at some point to the Scottish archive, and you never know, I might find something or I might not, and it's probably very unlikely, needle in a haystack, etc. And so I did eventually, and I didn't even rush about it. I just thought eventually I'll go. So I did get myself along there, and I said to them, "I'm looking for this man," and I gave them his name, and I thought, "There's no way that anything is going to be here." And anyway, long story short, about a few minutes later, they came out pushing a thing like an old tea trolley, and on it was a big stack of field notebooks, all of them by my great great grandfather, because in Scotland he had been allowed to sign his own work, and it was it was absolutely astonishing. I was so
Crazy.
gobsmacked. Yeah, it was like finding, treasure. It was like finding a treasure chest full of gold and jewels, and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that was all there, and he'd had been in Scotland for a year or two, I think, mostly down the west coast and in some of the islands, and he made detailed notes and observations and measurements. And of course, the languages are very similar. So Scottish Gaelic is very close to Irish Gaelic. And my father, who speaks Irish, he can read and understand Scottish Gaelic place names. So obviously, my great great grandfather was able to do the translations of place names in Scotland as well as Ireland.
I mean, we probably have your dad to thank for the Irish myth strand, don't we, inland?
Well, it's funny because my dad is really not somebody who's into stories or myths, but he's very he was an economics teacher, so really not at all fanciful in any way at all. But he only in that he's one of those immigrants who has never quite got over leaving Ireland. Even now, he still talks about going back. We have to say, Dad, you're 85. It's probably
Yeah,
not going to
it's
happen.
not going to happen now,
It's not
Dad.
going to happen now. But the only thing he would ever read to us for bedtime stories was Irish myths, which at the time was a bit annoying. We used to try and say, Dad, please will you read us, I don't know, Where the Wild Things Are or Pippi Longstocking. But he never would. He would only read Irish myths and say, these are the only stories you ever need to know. But in a way now I'm quite glad, because it's such a very particular narrative style and sort of way of storytelling. And, there are so many sort of very, very specific narrative rules about Irish myth. And Irish mythology is one of the best preserved in Europe, one of the best Celtic or pre-pagan folklore preserved. I think possibly because Ireland was never invaded by the Romans, so that kind of folklore and system of belief and stories and deities never got superimposed or taken over by Roman stories and deities. But anyway, so my father used to read us these stories, and in a way, they form a kind of narrative DNA for me because all the kind of very strict narrative rules of those myths are still very present in my head, and the attitude to the sort of, I don't know, the land or the natural world or whatever you want to call it, is I wanted to bring as much of that from the myth as I could into the novel, because in Irish myth, the natural world is the most powerful force, and animals come quite a low second, and humans are really down at the bottom third. So and you have to completely respect the land and do exactly what it tells you, and it's very powerful. It can control the action, it can change things, it can completely change the course of human lives. So if you're in an Irish myth, if you ever find yourselves in an Irish myth and you are told not to cross that river or not to cut a branch from that tree, you must not do it because something really bad will happen to you if you do.
Like the tree in your parents' garden.
Exactly. Yeah, my parents. There's a whole. Irish people will never cut a blackthorn tree because it's said to be belong to the other world. So my parents have a tree in their garden which is really overgrown, which I think possibly in Scotland people find a bit baffling.
Yeah. So your dad doesn't believe at all in myths, but you leave that tree alone.
No, yeah, no Irish person would ever do it. Very, very, yeah. You can often see in Ireland that there are fields where people will not mow around a certain tree or a certain well or a certain river because they have to be respected.
I'm just going to tell you, there's a comment from Vicky. Says she sent a copy of land to a friend of hers who's in his 70s and was a cartographer
Oh,
um,
really?
for the Open University and has been one of the first people to map parts of the world. And he apparently had the book on his list to get because it's being talked about in cartographic circles.
That makes me quite nervous. I'm sure I got
Yeah,
so much wrong.
no
So I
pressure. Yeah.
apologise in advance to any cartographers who are watching.
You know how it's so easy to offend the Austen fans or the Bronte fans? You've offended the
I
cartographers.
know, I probably have. I apologise.
Did you, when you started researching it, did you find that you knew as much as you thought you knew about the Great Hunger in Irish history?
Um, no. I mean, I knew, I was very worried, I think, or apprehensive about writing the Great Famine into a novel, certainly, because I think there are some things which almost resist fictionalization, and also, the Great Famine was such a disaster of such magnitude that, in a way, it was so difficult to write about. It's so enormous and so awful and so inexplicable. And Terry, I don't know, the critic Terry Eagleton said it pushes us to the limit of the inarticulable. But in a sense, also I knew that if you are going to write a novel about 19th century Ireland, you can't not write about it because
Mm,
there it sits right in the middle of the century, like this big storm cloud, and so you have to. It's there, and it's you can't write about Ireland without talking about it. Just as you can't write about Ireland if you without talking about immigration or music or all these other things. But you have to. I knew that I had to address it, and so I was worried about it, and I've known about it. I think probably from being the family that I'm from and the books in our house, but I'd never learnt about it at school. I was at school here in
mm.
Scotland, and I did higher history, and it wasn't really on as part of the curriculum at all. I think maybe even got half a page in our textbook,
That
and
much.
yeah, that much.
Yeah.
And there was, it was so sketchy and pretty biased, actually, the very scant facts that we were told about it. So yeah, I knew that it had to be a big part of the book, and I knew that I wanted to write a novel about resilience and survival, and I knew that some of the novel was going to be about a family trying to come out from under the shadow of the Great Famine. But I also knew that there would have to be scenes that were set during those terrible years. So it was very important to me that those scenes were as closely based on first-hand accounts that I could possibly find.
And Marguerite is in Ireland, and she just said we didn't learn much about it either.
Really, that's interesting. I think now, as far as I know now from my cousins and their kids, that it's very much part of the curriculum, which is right and good. But yeah, it is. I mean, I've been a lot about recently has been said. Colm Toibin wrote a really brilliant book called Erasures about it, and also about the what he described as the silence around it. So for 100 years, there was never a work of scholarship about it. Eamon de Valera commissioned the very first study of it, and that was in 1950, which is,
Yeah, it's mad.
which is astonishing, and I think it's so fascinating the fact that people were silent. It's almost like a sort of it's the way a person or an individual reacts after trauma. You kind of shut down and you are silent about it in a way people couldn't talk about it, I think. But I think that has changed a lot recently, and there are a lot, there's a whole Irish famine studies now. But it's hard. It's hard to know how to talk about it. And I think having read as much as I could possibly lay my hands on about it, I think the main question in my mind when I was writing the book was how on earth was something of this magnitude allowed to happen so close
Mm.
to the center of one of the richest empires in the world at the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think, when one of the times we've talked about it before, I mean, the scale of the deaths
Mm.
there compared to, I can't remember what you said now. Was it the next closest was Belgium or
Yeah.
something, and it
So
was
a million
minute.
people in Ireland died of starvation and starvation related disease. And I mean, people think that's a conservative estimate. And a further million to 2 million were forced to emigrate. And the country, so the blight the potato blight was all over Europe at the time. And the country that came second, that lost the second highest number of people was Belgium, and they lost 50,000 people. So, in the discrepancy of those statistics, a million to 50,000, there's a whole other story to be told about
Mm.
occupation and colonialism and the attitude of the British government towards the starvation that was happening in Ireland.
Yeah, I mean, the in inland, the main characters are Thomas and Liam and the land, arguably, and that's quite different for you, really, because most of your books have been telling women's untold stories. Did it, was it a different experience for you writing it, or was it just another untold story and it didn't really matter who the protagonists were, if that made any sense at all?
No, it does. Uh, it didn't really, it didn't. I mean, I have written about men before, and
Yeah.
but no, you're right. I mean, I didn't. Yeah, it didn't really feel. In a way, it was kind of less of a stretch writing about a relative of mine in Ireland in the
Mm.
19th century than it was, say, about a young woman in Renaissance Florence. So, that in a
Yes,
sense,
yeah.
I mean, in a sense, it's always fascinating to put yourself inside someone else's skin. That's one of the things I love most about being a novelist. That you get to walk in someone else's shoes. But it never really. I mean, it's funny. I When we were coming to the point where we were choosing narrators for the audiobook,
Mm.
they kept suggesting women, and I was saying, but it has to be a man. What?
Yeah,
Why would it not be? I mean, I know there are lots of different characters, and there are lots of other female characters in the book, but obviously it's Tomas's story.
yeah.
So, and it was really odd.
How
About three
weird,
times I
yeah.
had to say, no, we've. I mean, these are great
Yeah,
actors. These women are brilliant actors, but I think we need to find a man. So I was quite surprised because to me it always feels like Tomas. Tomas is the main character.
yeah,
Yeah. Anyway,
yeah.
so it has been directed by a man. Very well, I would say as well.
Yeah, yeah. No, he does a really lovely job. Can't remember his
Yeah.
name, but he does a really lovely job.
Dale.
Um,
I can't remember his name either. Dale something White.
he
O'Hara
does a
White.
good job if you're
I know.
anybody's
Sorry,
tempted to
Dale
listen.
O'Hara White is his name. Yeah. He did a great job.
So for Hamnet, you're a bit method, aren't you, about your research? So for Hamnet, you learnt herbalism and you learnt to, or went, I don't say you learnt to fly hawks because I'm like that might be a bit like much, but
I wouldn't
so
say learnt. I had a go.
it had a go, yeah. What would you, what did you do, if anything, for land?
Well, all kinds of. I spent a lot of time in Ireland, obviously, and I went on a trip with my son. Um, It's about 3 or 4 years ago. I went on a quest to find lots of different sacred wells in Ireland. And my son's always up for a slightly weird trip with a kind of odd purpose. So he was quite keen to come. So in Ireland, I've always been fascinated by sacred wells in Ireland. In fact, I don't know why my kids have borrowed my computer and they've put this weird blurry thing on it. And I
Yeah,
don't know how
you've
to get it off. It's
got one
really
of
odd.
those
Anyway,
blurry backgrounds.
yeah,
Yeah.
anyway, so if I could show, there's a photograph of me aged about 2 in County Kerry staring
Oh,
down.
everybody would love to see that.
Yeah, I know. But anyway, so the wells are all over Ireland. They're kind of every town and every village has one, and all you have to do really is go to a town, and if there's a bookshop, I would ask the bookseller where the nearest sacred well is, and because booksellers know everything, or you could ask in the pub, or you just find someone who's probably aged about 60 or 70, and you ask them, and some of them are very well kept, and they're by the roadsides, and they used a lot. You can see they're big parts of the community still, and they often have offerings around them or pieces of cloth tied to the tree. Some of them are actually inside churchyards, and there's a lot of rituals that go along with them. You walk around them 7 times, and you say a decade, and then you can ask for a wish or a cure usually. Oh, some of them are completely overgrown and neglected, and those are the ones that I really wanted to look at. So I did a lot of that. I did a lot of traipsing through fields and along cliff tops and asking people where did the well used to be, and to try and find it. What else did I do? I mean, again, I'm not going to say learned because that would be misleading. So the character of Enda, who's Liam's older sister, I always knew that she was going to be a musician, and I I have a friend of mine who's very good at the fiddle, and so I asked her to teach me how to play it because I learnt to I played the piano and I sang when I was younger, so I know how to read music, and that was kind of standing in my way. That kind of knowledge, which my parents paid a lot of money for, was sort of standing in my way in terms of writing about Enda and her musicianship, because couldn't work. I didn't know how. I couldn't understand how you'd learn an instrument by ear, how you would learn an instrument just by
Mhm.
listening to someone else sing or someone else play, and how you find the notes and how you find the melody on a stringed instrument. I'd never played a stringed instrument. So I got a friend of mine to teach me how to do the fiddle, and she was very nice and lent me a fiddle. Anyway, I mean, to cut a long story short, I'm not going to be bothering the folk music industry anytime soon. And actually, I was so bad that one of my cats took to sleeping on top of the fiddle box, almost as if to say,
So
"You are
you couldn't
not
open it.
getting in this box ever again."
Yeah.
So yes, my fiddle career was very short. Put it that way.
Um, so it's Jessica, isn't it? Friend Jessica, is it Jessica Twentyman? Yes, yeah. I just didn't want to get your name wrong. Jessica's just said she agrees about the Audible narrator and that she
Okay.
listened on Audible, and by the time she'd finished, she'd gone and bought the book and then read the book,
Oh,
which
thank
is
you.
really, so it really works. And Elaine was saying that she went holy well hunting in Donegal last
Ah,
summer. And it's so interesting, isn't it, the water cure? Because it's nice. I think you and I have talked before about how it's science. It's not like fanciful. It's based
yeah.
on
Well, it is
fact.
because actually, I don't know if the Holy Well Hunter also knows this, but somebody did an analysis recently of some of the water in Ireland's holy wells, and of course they go back, to pre-Christian times, and people have believed for thousands of years that certain wells will cure certain ailments. And there's one quite famous one in County Cork, which has been long known or long um, used as a cure for madness. And somebody analysed the waters, and they found that it had very high levels of lithium. Um, so it just goes to show those druids were onto something.
I mean, just to remind you all, if you've got questions for Maggie, do throw them in because our conversation, regulars will know our conversation will go where it goes. So there will be stuff that you'll probably be interested in that I might not get to. So just shout whenever you think of something. What was I? I've lost my own thread now. I know what I was going to say. Tell us a bit more about, is it Bronze Age or is it even before that the other strand of the
Yeah.
book?
So I was trying to do two things with this novel. First of all, like I said, I wanted it to write a story about a family surviving and coming out from underneath the shadow of the Great Famine. Um, but also, I wanted to try and tell the whole story of a country just via one peninsula and all the people who've lived upon it. Um, so, I always knew when I was planning out the book initially, that I knew that the book is in four parts, just as there are four children in the family, and I always knew that the second part, I wanted it to go right back to the earliest inhabitants of Ireland, which is probably, as Sam says, the Bronze Age, and I was I was a bit worried about handing in. So I did write it, and I really loved writing it. I really loved it, and because I really love research and learning things, and also it was really inspired by one of my favourite museums in the whole world. I love museums too, and the archaeology wing of the National Museum of Ireland is one of my favourite places. It's the place where they have the bog bodies, which are, I think, probably if I had to say the most amazing thing I've ever seen, it would probably be them. You know, the
Now, I
idea.
did learn about those at school, but I didn't learn
Oh,
about the
did
Irish
you?
one. Yeah, we did this thing called Tolland Man. I don't know where he was based, but he was a bog body, basically.
I think he's Danish, isn't he? Isn't Tolland Man Danish?
Sounds like he could be. Anyway,
Yeah.
sorry, not
Anyway,
relevant to
so
this
you no, it
conversation.
is. It's very relevant. So yes, if you go into the archaeology museum, you can stand in a case next to the case where these bog bodies are, and it's just an incredible experience to stand next to some a person who's so ancient yet so completely recognizable. You know that you can see this person is thousands of years old, but you can see their fingernails and you can see the bristles on their chin or their earrings, or it's just, I just find it extraordinary every time I see them. And one of them, my children particularly love it because they have, one of them has hair like, my kids have got hair like me as well, and their hair's almost identical. And when they were small, they'd always say, "Look, they've got your hair," which
Yeah.
is. But it's anyway. I can't remember. Oh yeah, that's right. So we're talking about the Bronze Age. So that museum to me is a kind of, it's a sort of visual representation of history, because everything in it is found not particularly by archaeologists but by just farmers who were digging their land or cutting turf, and they would find these amazing artifacts, and they're in the museum. So I spent a lot of time in that museum when I was writing that section, but I was worried actually about handing the manuscript in, because I mean I've worked with the same editor, Mary Ann Harrington, for almost 30 years now. I've been very lucky to have the same editor my whole writing life, and she's never yet written WTF in the margin of one of my manuscripts. But I was
Yeah.
a bit worried that she would read
Yeah.
that and say, "What is going on? Why are we in Bronze Age Ireland?
Yeah.
What are we doing here? Who are these people? Why are you talking about them?" But luckily she didn't. She was very supportive about it, and there it stands. It's still there. So I'm really happy that it made it into the book.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to be honest that the first time I read it, I read the first section and then I turned the page and I started to read the Bronze Age section and I went,
You thought
I probably
WTF? That's what
thought
you were going to write in the
WTF.
manuscript.
But then within a couple of pages, I was like, I was away, I was immersed. And it's like, I kind of feel like you're at a place in I know you're going to make like a cringe face when I say this, but you are at a place in your career where you can get away with that. You can get away with that lurch back
So,
3,000 years in time. What was I going to say? Sorry, there's loads of, I've asked for the questions and now I'm getting them. Amy has asked a question that I was going to ask, which was basically because you love a bit of research. So how do you not go down a rabbit hole
oh, I
and stay
do
there? You do.
completely. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think rabbit holes are bad things, really. Um, I always think anything you learn is never wasted. And of course, you know, in order to in order to confidently create a scene in a, I don't know, 19th century cottage in Ireland, or a house in 16th century Stratford, you've got to know so much to give yourself the confidence to write that scene. You've got to know exactly what everybody's wearing, what their clothes are made of, what they feel like on the skin, what the room looks like. Is there a fire? What does it smell like? Are they eating something? What are they eating? What utensils are they using? What are the walls made of? You need to know everything in order to feel yourself in that room and give yourself the confidence to do it. But then, I don't know. I mean, I suppose when when you're editing the final draft of that scene, you've got to make sure that maybe only 2% of all that knowledge shows, because otherwise you're not writing a historical novel, you're sort of writing a PhD
Mm.
thesis, and that's a different thing. And I find it very off-putting when historical novels set in the past feel really laden with history, and you always feel that the writer really wants you to know that they've done their homework. So
Yeah.
yes, I mean, there was one day, in fact, when I was writing this book, when I think I started, I needed to know how people in 19th century Ireland brought in the hay, and I somehow got completely distracted by cheese making. And I know, I mean, if you want to know about cheese making in Ireland in the 19th century, I am your woman. But there's nothing about cheese making in the novel.
Yeah.
But you never know. You never know when you might need to know that.
Because it would be easy, wouldn't it, to wear that? And like you say, so many books you read, you do think you really want me to know that you know all that,
Yeah,
and that
absolutely.
you know,
And it
yeah.
just pulls you right out of the book, and it makes you think I am sitting in an armchair reading a novel. But actually, what you should be thinking is, I'm in this scene, and I can't wait to know what happens next, or what this person is going to do, or how they feel. It's the
So
wrong thing to make your reader feel, I think.
are you an instinctive overwriter or underwriter in the first instance?
I don't know. I think it's different every time. And there is, with every book that you write, you have a huge learning curve because you've got to learn how to write that book and that story. I remember when I finished my first book, I remember thinking, okay, I know how to write novels now, but actually I didn't. I knew how to write that novel, and
Mm,
when I started the second novel, I had to learn how to write that one. It's a bit like having children. I remember when I had my first child, there's a huge learning curve about how to keep a small human alive. And then you have another baby, and you think, oh no, this is an entirely different human being.
mm.
And novels are the same, I think. And you have to learn. You've got to reinvent the wheel every time, and you should, because otherwise you just end up writing the same book over and over again.
Like, some editors would not like that answer at all. They're like, no, do write the same book over and over again so we know what we're getting.
Well, as I've said already, I'm very lucky to have my editor, Marianne. I mean, I don't know what she says about me behind my back. It's possible, but I'm pretty sure she's
Yeah.
always very encouraging. I think whatever I kind of come up with, or whatever ideas, she always says yes. She has a head tilt where she thinks,
Yeah.
you're thinking, but no, she's brilliant, and I'm very lucky to have her.
Ellie has asked, says your writing's got very distinct, almost poetic cadence. Do you read your drafts aloud to test the rhythm, or does it just come on the page?
No, I wish. No.
No, well, come
Um,
over 15 drafts on the page.
yeah, many, many drafts. I am a bit of a redrafter. I always think there's, as you know yourself, Sam, writing, I don't need to womansplain this, but writing a novel
No, go for it.
is a lot of work. And
Yeah.
there are writers who do a lot of work before they actually put pen to paper or finger to keyboard. And there are writers who start writing, and there's a lot of work is going to be after you start writing. And I'm definitely much in the latter category. I have heard other writers talk about how they spend a whole year planning every single chapter meticulously before they
Mm.
start writing. But I think either you do that or you just redraft at the end, and I do that instead. I can't imagine, I don't know, theoretically planning something I haven't begun. That would feel just really odd to me. Apparently, my son calls it you're either a planner or a pantser, as in flying
That's
around the
it.
city with
Yeah.
plants. So I'm definitely a
Yeah.
pantser. But it's just the way it is, and I really like redrafting. I sort of I love every stage about it, but writing the first draft is a very special stage because I always know that nobody's going to see my first draft, and it's just for me, and I'm sort of finding out what's there. It feels like sort of excavation as much as it does creation. And then at the end of the first draft, I look at it and I know that it's a really big mess. And
Yeah.
I look at it as a bit. I imagine a sculptor would look at a lump of raw clay, and you think, I know my novel is in there somewhere, but there's going to be a lot of work carving it out. But it'll be there, and it's just so you look at it as raw material rather than a draft.
I mean, when Lily King came on, she was talking about she writes her first draft by hand. And actually, when I interviewed her in Brighton at the beginning of June, and she was showing me her notebooks, and there it kind of almost goes. I was thinking about this when you were talking about your great great grandfather's field books, the kind of artifacts.
Mm.
Do you write by hand or do you do it all on screen?
No, I do. I really like writing by hand. In fact, I can show you here because I'm sitting at my desk. I collect vintage fountain pens. These are just some of my favourites here. I don't know if you can see them with the weird
Oh
blurring
yeah, we
around them.
can, yeah.
Yeah. So I start my writing day by, this is my favourite. This is a 1950s Parker, I think. Anyway,
Wow.
so I start my writing day by filling my fountain pen with actual ink. But I don't want to sound like someone who, cuts a quill, but I like taking notes and making plans by hand. So I have a notebook for every. I don't know if I've got my land notebook here. No, I think it's down. I have a studio in the garden where most of all that happens. So I think it's down there. But I write everything. I write lots of notes. So I fill up lots of notebooks, and I might do drafts and post it, big kind of plans of post its and flowcharts all by hand. But actually, if I'm writing the book, I will be writing on screen. I don't. I find it amazing that anyone still writes a draft by hand. I don't know how anyone would do that. I'd be. I think I would find the permanence of ink quite frightening. I like note taking with ink, but
Oh, she does it in pencil.
oh, does she? That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think if I was, if suddenly for whatever reason electricity disappeared and laptops disappeared, I would probably still write by hand. But I've always done it. I think I'm of a generation where I just used I've just seen the question, do you get inky fingers? Yes, is the answer. I do.
Yeah.
But the trick is to wear dark socks and you can just wipe all the ink off on your socks and carry on.
Yeah, or just live in jeans and nobody even notices
Yeah,
with
exactly.
them.
It doesn't matter. I have one of my children believes that jeans are self-cleaning. You never have to wash them. It's so disgusting, but
Do you mean
it's
they
quite
aren't?
cute. I think I was very inspired by. I always loved one of my books I read and reread a lot was Little Women, as of course many people do when they're younger. And there's a whole description about Jo wiping the nib of her ink pen off on her clothing, and I think I was just inspired by her to keep on doing that.
Yes. Yeah. There's a very sensible, good question from Ellie, which is about the tension between your characters. A lot of it happens in the quiet moments and the unsaid.
Mm.
Which relationship was the most, so from socks and inky fingers to which relationship was the most challenging to balance emotionally?
Oh, that's interesting. I don't. I mean, sorry, I'm answering a different question now, but I think that the relationship I enjoyed exploring the most and creating the most tension was between Liam and Enda. I always knew that
Mm,
they were going to be very close and close in age and close in emotion, but also there was going to be quite a lot of friction. And the scene where I don't, not to give any spoilers, but the scene where they have a big fight up a tree, and it kind of starts off as a kind of sibling fight, and then it turns into something really serious and physical. It was quite interesting to kind of to write about, and I was thinking about my own sibling relationships and my children and bringing all that to bear on it. And that was it was really enjoyable, but it was knotty and it took me a long time. And I went back and back and back over that scene because I wanted to get that kind of, just to kind of try and convey that friction, but also love and the friction within love and the love within friction.
well, Enda's such a good, interesting character because if Enda had been a boy, she was so much more suited on
Yes.
the face of it to do all the things that Liam got to do that he didn't want to do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And also that they are very similar. And again, not to give any spoilers, they can be mistaken for each other quite easily.
Yes. No spoilers. What was it? Oh God, I was going to say something. Let's talk about Eugene because I love Eugene and thinking about the silences. Is that is how hard, easy was it to create a character who didn't speak?
Well, I always knew that Eugene was going to be a silent character, that he was never going to speak, he was going to be non-verbal. And I knew that right from the start. And, I think the four children of Tomas and Fina, in different ways, well, I suppose what I should say, I think that a lot of the novel I knew was going to be about speech and silence. And sorry,
So do you need
slightly.
to get
No, no,
some
I'm slightly
water or
losing my
something?
voice. No, no, it's fine. I always knew that it was going to be a lot about silence and speech and language and being silenced. And, the first line of the novel
Mm.
is his father was ever a man of few words, and I knew that Eugene, in a different way, the four children are aware of they know kind of roughly the parameters of what their parents have been through, but they don't know the details, and their parents never speak of it. They never speak about the things that they've experienced or witnessed during the Great Famine. But the children, in their own different ways, each of the four of them manifest and absorb that silence or those gaps in their parents' stories in different ways. And Eugene is someone who never speaks, but in a sense, he hears and absorbs a lot more than anybody else does. And again, but not to give any spoilers, but he's the only one who actually hears a story which lies at the heart of his father. And of course, he can't tell anyone else. But he's connected to the land and the peninsula in a way like nobody else is.
Random question. Are you wearing your fish necklace?
No, I'm not. My fish
Oh,
necklace actually
damn.
belongs to my daughter. She lent it to me
Oh,
while I was writing the book. No, I think I'm wearing my M necklace today. No, I've
oh,
given it back, you see, because she lent it to me while I was writing it, and then she lent it to me for the book tour, and now it's back with her, which is fair enough. It wasn't mine. I
yeah.
do actually have a fish necklace, which is Chinese, but yeah, I'm not wearing it today.
So if you haven't finished it, the fish is very important. Um,
Yeah, it's a very important
any
fish.
anybody got? I've got loads more questions, but if you've got any questions for Maggie, don't go away sad because you didn't ask your question. Um, so I think, do you listen to music when you write? I can't remember. I think you've told me something about it. I
Yes,
can't
I
remember.
don't. I can't listen to music while I write. I have to be in. I have to have silence when I'm writing. I mean, not a total silence, but I can't. Yeah, I find music very distracting. But I do have. I use music a lot as a kind of bridge between my kind of everyday life and my writing life. So when I'm getting ready, when I'm filling my pen, basically, and wiping my inky fingers on my socks, that kind of, and just kind of getting myself ready to start writing, I will always have a certain playlist, and I have a playlist for every novel that I write. And it's obviously with this book there was a lot of Irish music on it, but it's not always music that's specific to the time and place. It's often some kind of emotional connection or thematic connection. But I did have, yeah, I had a lot of music on this one. There's a great song by an Irish band called The Scratch, and it's called Shanachie. And I listened to that over and over again. Shanachie is the epigraph for the novel, and it's the Irish for traditional folklore storyteller, but also a custodian or a historian. So it's a very important kind of concept.
Yeah.
There is actually a real Shanachie in the book, an old Shanachie. But so that song is great. So that was the one I listened to over and over again when I was getting ready, just to kind of get me in the mood, and it gets you. I think repetition, listening to a song again and again, just gets your brain in gear somehow.
Marguerite's asked a quite pertinent question, which is she's asked, is the peninsula Kerry?
Well, the peninsula is partly, I mean, it is a fictional peninsula. It's a kind of amalgam of lots of different places, and it's deliberately not named because it's not given a specific geographical location because I wanted to invite readers to experience maplessness. I think it's so hard for us in the modern world when we all have a little tiny GPS in our pockets. It's so hard for us to imagine a time when we didn't know how to get around, when we didn't know what was over that hill unless we climbed it, and we didn't know how to get to places unless we asked someone. Um, so I wanted to just kind of try to give people that sense that they might know where they are, but they're not entirely sure, that it feels slightly unfamiliar and familiar all at the same time.
Yeah, and where is home if you
Yeah,
don't know where home is?
yeah. And how do you get there?
So, let me think. Amy has said, when you write about people who are dead, do you feel like they live again in some form in the pages, or can they never be recovered?
Whew. I mean, I think if you choose to write about people who were real, as I have done actually in the last two, three books actually. Um, I think you always have to be very aware that what you're writing is a novel, and that these people were real, and even though you're borrowing sometimes their names and their circumstances or their dates of birth and death and certain time, elements of their story, you always have to keep in your mind that there's a difference. Because I think it's and I always I always feel that if I'm going to do that, then there has to be a kind of respect, and you have to find out as much as you possibly can about them, and not, even if you find something that doesn't quite fit in with whatever it is you want to tell, you can't just pretend you didn't read that book. You've got to try and make it work. And also to bear in mind, that's one of the reasons why the name Shakespeare never appears in Hamnet. It's my marker in a sense, that this is a novel, and I have taken these elements of these people's lives, but actually they were real, and their bones lie in Holy Trinity, and that should never be forgotten. So that's one of the reasons I never use the word Shakespeare, apart from the fact, of course, that it's quite distracting
Yeah.
for me as the writer and for readers as well.
Um, Jessica's saying, I mean, we talked about science and discipline of cartography, and we touched on myth, but there is some really spooky stuff, myth, supernatural activity, the pool, the wonderful pool. How did you approach writing those parts and creating that atmosphere? Because it's quite a shift.
I think I mean, I just was referring a lot to Irish myth. Actually, there's a brilliant, there are so many retellings of those myths and those myth cycles and those characters. The one I really loved is by Marie Heaney, who wrote a version of it called Over Nine Waves. She was married to someone called Seamus. I don't know, you may have heard of him.
Yeah.
Uh,
Some
but
dude.
yeah, some
The
guy.
what? The husband of Marie. Yeah.
Yes, the husband of the more famous Marie. And that's a really beautiful retelling. She's a very beautiful writer, and she respects the stories and those myths, but makes them her own as well. So I did read a lot of those at the time, and I wanted to kind of incorporate as I said, the kind of narrative rules and tropes into the novel. But it's not a direct translation. The things that happen in the book are not directly taken from myth at all. It was just a kind of sense of atmosphere. Um, and also the kind of, but the sort of slightly, I don't know if you call it supernatural or the sort of magic realism or whatever it is you want to call it in the book.
Mm.
It I wanted it to have a kind of, for some people who, to seeing through the eyes of people who believe in it, it could happen, but also the people who don't believe in it, there's a scientific explanation for everything that does happen. So it's a kind of, yeah, I think I was just, I suppose it's sort of emblematic for me about the well, the well that is said to cure madness. Some people really believe it, some people don't, but actually there's a very strong scientific explanation as to why it might work. I'm very interested in the idea of truth and science in myth and the overlap between the two.
Right. I'm conscious that you're probably desperate for your bed, but there's a couple more. Tanya said she found land really moving. She's got Irish ancestors, but she is a massive memoir lover. Is there any chance for another one? Or are
Another
you
one for me.
done with memoir?
I don't know. I mean, you never say never. I always said I would never write a memoir. So if I say I'm never going to write another one, it may not turn out not to be true. But at the moment, I don't think so. I think I would need to live a bit more, really. I mean, my memoir ended, I don't know, whenever it was, 10 years ago or whatever. But so, yeah, I'd need to have a few more decades under my belt before I even thought about that.
And I know what the answer to this question is going to be, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Go for
Um, what is next for you? What are
it.
you working? I know what you're going to say,
No,
but
it's
what are you
okay.
working on, Maggie? Or are you actually putting your feet up as if?
No, I don't. I'm not really much of a putter up of feet. Well, as you know, Sandwich, I'm sure you know what I'm going to say, but I am very superstitious. I'm not a particularly superstitious person, despite this novel, but I am a bit superstitious talking about things that I haven't finished yet. Just because I feel if I talk about them, the sort of verbal act of talking will drain me of the desire to write it, and also it feels like such a sort of frail green shoot before you finish it. So I'm afraid I can't tell you. But
More
I might.
historical?
What I could say, I can't even tell you that. What I could say is that I might be writing a screenplay quite soon, possibly for Land.
Ah, is that the Land screenplay?
Yes, that's right. Maybe there are things I can't really say anything about because actually I'm not allowed, not because I'm superstitious. But yeah, there are lots of exciting possibilities happening with that.
Very exciting. Um, I in a moment, I'm going to let everybody know about the next book club, but I think I'm going to release you so that you can go on holiday or go to bed or both. Maggie, thank you so much for
No,
making
thank
time for
you.
us. We have absolutely loved having you. Come back anytime.
I'd love